Hello, 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 friends, and welcome to what will probably likely be a one of a kind video. I had the idea from regular Pat on YouTube and I believe regular Pat on Twitch, same person, but regular Pat, to do a Pokemon team for the Wild Arms cast, if you will, as regular Pat did a similar idea with the Kingdom Hearts team, or Kingdom Hearts characters, I should say. So I decided, well, I love Wild Arms. It's my second favorite franchise, probably first favorite franchise to be quite honest, but because it's not getting any new games, it's kind of now falling behind Kingdom Hearts a little bit. But all the same, I decided to give the Wild Arms cast a Pokemon team. So starting off, just a little bit of ground things to cover real quick with regards to the teams that I'm giving them. So I decided to base the teams on a couple of ideas, specifically some tools that they have, especially in the first three games. The main cast that you're playing as main characters, they have a tool associated with them. So I decided, let's say, if I, whenever possible, especially for the earlier three games, Wild Arms 1, 2, and 3, to do it based off of whatever tool that they had. If I could, I would also go into things like character weapons, but a lot of them use guns, so it's not really something I could really represent with Pokemon. There's not a lot of varied Pokemon that use or are based on guns. Remoraid and Octillery are the ones that come to mind first and foremost, besides Inteleon, who shoots with his finger and does get like a water sniper rifle when he Dynamaxes, which will show up later, of course, or their abilities. The other thing I could go off of was character growth moments or development moments within the game, either like character specific, that something that they realize, or something that they have to go against, or something that they learn, or something related to their character growth moment, because a lot of Pokemon, while evocative of like personal growth with the evolutions or evolving, or like for example Gardevoir has the like connection to emotion and the trainer's receptiveness and emotional states and stuff like that. I didn't really want to go into like the weeds and figure out like what Pokemon represents, trust, or represents this, represents that. So I just kind of went for vague themes or kind of overarching elements, if you will. Some of them are also going to be based on character design. If I can avoid it, I would, because if character is wearing purple and I give them a purple Pokemon, that's kind of the bottom of the barrel for me. But some of them don't really have that much character moments or character growth at all. So I went with that for some of them. I also tried to go for a group theme, especially per game, if it felt applicable. I know I did for Wild Arms 1, 2, 3, and 4. They have a theme Pokemon that is relevant to the game specifically, but it's not like, I don't know how to describe it in terms of, it's not something that is like representative of the group as a whole, but the Pokemon are a group in and of themselves, maybe barring one or two if it didn't fit. Like, for example, the first one, which, spoiler alert, will include the Reggies. I didn't include Regigigas, even though I probably could have. I just didn't think it fit for what I will be going through. And again, this is just an exercise in me giving Pokemon teams to characters that exist in a Western sci-fi universe. One of the rules I imposed on myself is I didn't want duplicate Pokemon. Regular Pat also did this as well, but I'm taking it a step further from what he did. Is I'm including Megas, Form Chasers, and regional variants that aren't duplicate Pokemon in my mind. Speaking of, one of them will be a theme, which I'll touch on what the first Wild Arms character will do, Rudy. I will explain one of his Pokemon that you'll see the regional form of later on. But if the regional form fit better, I went with the regional form versus any other form, if that makes sense. One comment for me that I wanted to make on this is Million Memories could have been much, much better. We never got it in the West. It was a Japanese exclusive Wild Arms gacha game, but the art for Wild Arms characters from the gacha game are immaculate. They are phenomenal, and I wish we had more of them, because some of these characters needed and desperately need better art. I'm looking at you, Belselk and Antonora. I could not find high quality art of either of those characters, so I grabbed whatever I could find. All of these images are from the Wild Arms fan wiki, if you will. A lot of these are also going to be bad images. Some of them I got from screenshots of the game, because I just couldn't find anything better than that. And I also needed specific images for some of them because they evolve or change, and I kind of wanted to represent that, if you will. And also, I will probably touch on this throughout, but saying it at the top hopefully will remind me not to do it. But there's going to be massive, massive spoilers for the entirety of the Wild Arms series. I may not be spoiling the entire plot of every game, but I will be spoiling big character moments, big emotional villain moments, villain transformations, if you will. I will be spoiling character names, the fact that certain characters are villains, the fact that certain characters change or grow or have developments that are in game considered massive spoilers. So this is your one and only warning. I will probably warn you again, but this is your one and only warning at the top. Spoilers abound for the characters of Wild Arms and plot elements as it relates to characters, both protagonists and villains, and also character moments as a whole, if you will. So, without further ado, let's start with the first Wild Arms game. And no better to start it off than the first character you may be actually playing as, which is Rudy Rough-Knight. Please excuse the fact that there's going to be red underlines. I tried to fix it beforehand, but I am capturing this. This is Google Slides. I'm capturing this off of my computer because I don't have video editing skills and I don't have the time or money to spend on somebody to video edit it for me. So it is what it is. We're doing with what we can. I'm doing this on a budget, if you will. So Rudy Rough-Knight, for his tools, they are on the far left 4, if you will, in the square grid, if you will. So starting on the top left. With Voltorb, he gets bombs from Surf Village right at the beginning of the game. The second tool he gets is Radar, which is harder to find a Pokemon that is referenced to finding items. I know there's some with a pickup ability. I could have gone with any of those, but I wanted them to, because there's 3 iterations of Radar, technically more with Wild Arms 4 and Wild Arms 5, but they're less tools in those games and more like abilities, and or one's a bullet in 5. So it really didn't matter for me to have like 5 groups of this kind of tool. I only went with 3, Wild Arms 1, 2, and 3. And so I figured the Meowth would work in this because it is, it's got a coin on its head. I don't believe it has a pickup ability, but it is, known for money and the move Payday. I figured that was a nice relationship to what Radar does, allowing you to find items, potentially money. And it has 3 forms. It's got the regular Cantonian form, the Galarian form, and then the Alolan form, which also fits Wild Arms 1, 2, and 3 protagonists who do use those tools, at least in theme. So that's why I chose Meowth. This was actually a recommendation from my friend Burning Calcuna, who also is on Twitch and also on Twitter. He suggested Meowth for that exact reason, and I was like, that fits, and there's 3 of them, and I liked it, so we went with it. Rudy's next tool is the skates that he gets in the Epitaph Tower, but there's no like skate Pokemon, despite there being like a skater gym trainer. She uses Hawlucha, which I didn't think fit, or Lucario, which I also didn't think fit. So I decided to go for more wheel Pokemon, as we'll see with the other tools who are similar to Wild Arms 1. They kind of set the precedent. So we'll see some of these tools in different variations. So you'll be probably seeing some of these Pokemon, not en masse, but repeated in themes. So we went with Whirlipede for this one because I figured it's a round object and it's in a wheel shape. It's close enough to what I'm going to get for the point of having like skates, if you will. And then the Punch Glove, which is his last tool, I decided there's no better Pokemon than Hitmonchan for that, which is, he's got punching gloves, he's got boxing gloves, which is the same icon, if you will, as what the Punch Glove is in the game. So I figured that was a nice relationship there, and the fact that Rudy can punch things like objects, the walls, the ground, and have different effects, that could work well for Hitmonchan. So the other 2, Registeel and Octillery. Starting off with Octillery, I think will probably be easier. So I gave Rudy Octillery for 2 reasons. One, because he is the first gun user, and one of his things is a hand cannon, and Octillery is based off of a tank, so I figured that relationship between hand cannons, bullets to Octillery being kind of a cannon in and of itself made sense. And as far as the Reggie goes, the theme Pokemon for Wild Arms 1, for at least for the main characters, the main 3, is the Reggie trio. Not necessarily in the same role per each character, but for Rudy, it's due to the fact that he is living metal, which I figured, and in my opinion, was a nice relationship with Regigigas, as it's a steel automaton, basically. It's living metal. And the space element does come into play because Rudy was essentially made by demons, I believe, who came from space in that kind of way, where the demons aren't native to Filgaia. They kind of came in and started fucking shit up. So it felt nice, especially since Rudy loses his arm. That's this kind of whole development with regards to that, and him finding out that he is an automaton, if you will. He is just a full robot who is basically human, if you will. Android, basically. If I had to call it that. Not automaton. I meant android the entire time. But nonetheless, he is a robot man, and we love him. So, moving into the princess herself, Cecilia Adelheid. Her tools, the first one that she gets is the teardrop, and I figured since there's no other major blue crystalline Pokemon, Regice would make the most sense here with regards to her being that, having that as like the main focal point of the game, essentially, is the whole teardrop aspect. Not necessarily elemental wise or like property wise comparing to teardrop, but I figured it was a nice shape. It looks like the teardrop if you take off your glasses, it looks like the teardrop. Her second tool, which is a pocket watch. Unfortunately, there are no watch Pokemon. I mean, there's a watch dog Pokemon, but I'd rather go more one-to-one, so I decided to go with Kling Clang for this one, just due to the fact that it looks like to me watch gears, and I thought that was a nice one. There's no watch face on it, obviously, but if I'm going to have to pick something for a watch, I think Kling Clang would work for that. She gets the Magic Rod, and there's, again, no Pokemon that just uses a stick as like a wand besides Delphox, which is what I went for in this case. It's not necessarily elemental focus, which we'll see in later instances, but I figured it was the nice tie-in of it being a wand held by what would be a magic user. So her last tool, which is represented by Simipour, is the Water Vase. It's the source of endless water. And there's, again, no vase-like Pokemon. I mean, there are some that you could say are similar in terms of things that are being held, but I think Simipour, because you are, as Cecilia, are pouring out the water from the vase, has a nice tie-in, and also being a water type would make sense. And for Cecilia, she has Golurk because of her connection to Asgard. She is the one to bridge, like, telepathically, if you will, with the Earth Golem, and she is the one who kind of gets it to stir and be in motion with her compassion and her kind of dialogue that she has with Asgard. So I gave her the representation of Golurk for Asgard. Not necessarily the Pokemon I will assign for for Asgard being Golurk, but as far as no duplicates, I figured Golurk being a ground golem and being a ghost, a relic of the past, if you will, nice tie-in for what Asgard essentially is in the first game. And then for her as a character, I gave her the last Pokemon being Hatterene, just because as the mage, Hatterene, in my opinion, is the most magical looking Pokemon. She's got the hat of a mage, the witch's hat. She's got the crystal at the end, could be a reference to the teardrop. She's got similar coloring, and the fact that Cecilia cuts her hair in her transition, I think, is a nice tie-in to her as a princess, specifically before she cuts her hair, which is why I chose this picture as her with her long hair in her more Princess Abby attire, which is similar to what I would think Hatterene is. Not specifically color-wise, just style-wise, with Hatterene's hair essentially being what forms her dress, if you will. Moving on to the third party member, we have Jack Van Buris. His tools are Handpan, his partner, the Wind Mouse. There are not that many blue rats in Pokemon, so I went with the best option, which was Rattata. I thought I could make him a shiny and make it blue. Rattata's shiny form is beige, and not something I was so happy to use. So his second tool is the lighter, which he does get in pretty early in the game. And I figured there's no one-to-one Pokemon for a lot of these, so I went aesthetic-wise. I think having Open Flame Litwick was going to be more in line with what the lighter does, and the fact that he's lighting like oil lamps, I could have probably gone with Lampent, but I think Litwick would fit Jack, as he is also a treasure hunter. He goes in different ruins and like caves and ancient places to explore for treasure and secrets of the past, trying to find true power and stuff like that. So I figured having a ghost fire type would make sense because he's probably going to encounter them throughout his journey. Ferrothorn, though, is a bit of a stretch, and most of these from here will be stretches as well. Jack's tool is the grappling hook, and again, there's no Pokemon that really wields any kind of item for the most part. Aegislash, you can argue, has a shield, but there's no Pokemon that wields like a whip or wields like a chain besides Ferrothorn. I mean, it's got the spiky balls, which is what I'm going off of. Like, if he Vine Whips his spiky ball, could that not be considered a grappling hook? That's what I'm going here for, especially since he hangs from ceilings and he can, I'm imagining, connect them to other places by just whipping them around. So it's a nice tie-in. His last tool is the guitar, and the most guitar-like Pokemon I think Jack would use would be Toxtricity, which is the one who strums his chest to play music. It's not a one-to-one, but it's the guitar Pokemon in my mind. And because he is a Van Buren, and in the game we learned what Van Buren means in terms of that role in his hierarchy of being a knight and being a sword wielder, I think sword form Aegislash would make the most sense because he's got the sword as his main weapon, and this is probably going to be the one time we'll see, not one time, but it's probably going to be one of the few times we see actual weapons being represented by a Pokemon, because there are so few sword Pokemon, and the ones I've used, I basically used all of them, except for maybe like a few like Scyther. But with swords form Aegislash, I figured it would make the most sense, both with his big sword that he has, but also the fact that his name is meant to be like the shield, if you will, to the sword princess, if we will, which I don't think we'll cover specifically, but we will cover partly. And then Regirock to try to fill out the Regi trio. Jack's intro, he has essentially a comedic intro, Indiana Jones style, where he trips a switch or flips a switch or trips on a switch or whatever, and gets several boulders chasing after him. So I figured because he goes through ruins and the fact that he also had some run-in with boulder traps, it would make the most sense to have him be represented by Regirock specifically. So let's go through, not a main character in the first game, but the remake, you do get her for a bit. Mariel, she is an Aloo. She has bunny ears, and I figured Wigglytuff was a nice tie-in to that. This is the one time where I'm not counting these as duplicates. I just wanted multiple on the screen. She is raising flowers, so I figured she would have a lot of Flabebe and Floettes. Maybe not full Florges, just due to the state of the world, but like baby flower Pokemon. And going on with the fairy kind of otherworldly theme, I figured going with another fairy type would make sense. So I gave her 2 white Flabebes, an orange Flabebe, and then just the Floette I could find. Again, she's probably going to have more of them around her garden. Maybe they're not hers, but I just know she's going to be kind of surrounded by flower Pokemon, if you will. Moving on to the first enemy we have, Siegfried wields a lance and is blue, and he is the Blue Menace, and the only Pokemon I could really associate with him would be the shiny Giratina, because it's blue. That's all I went for. And he's a big, imposing, and evil, and he kind of looks like the same armor with the little like trio of like spines or bones or whatever they are, with a little trio of shoulder pauldron, arm pauldrons, whatever you call them, on Siegfried. So again, not the best comparison. A lot of the villains are just kind of going to get one-off Pokemon that I think suits their vibes for the most part, because they're not one note per se, but they are very hard to depict because they are very unique and individual characters that aren't easily translated to Pokemon, as we'll see with the next one, Alazad. Now, you may be looking at this and be like, what the heck am I thinking, Ryan? But I have an explanation. I just didn't grab the screenshot of it because in the screenshot, it makes even less sense what you're looking at unless you grab the battle one, and the battle one is chunky. Alazad is essentially under a tablecloth the entire game. He floats, and at the end, when you fight him, he turns from the white floating tablecloth thing into a giant scorpion demon hybrid thing. So I figured Drapion being a weird like hybrid scorpion demon thing would make the most sense comparison wise. So that's why I went with it. He's got the tail, which is similar but not exact to the tail that Alazad will have when he transforms. He's got the front facing claws, which are like the 2 front facing claws that Alazad has. So I figured being a big old purple meanie, I think fits Alazad very well. As far as the Pokemon I think Alazad would have or would be interested in having. Beliselk is another one. He wields a flail or a chain and ball, if you will, and he is big green lizard guy. And I probably could have found a big green lizard guy, but I wanted one that looked evil, so I went with Grimmsnarl. There's some tie-ins. It's not the same shade of green, but he's got green. He's got the pink in terms of the accents, kind of like with this art of Belselk, which is, by the way, the only art I could find for him. And it looks crunchy because I think it was like taken from the manual that you get with Wild Arms, I think, because they did color manuals back then. I'm fairly sure this is from the manual. But it is what it is. I think it fits because I know, especially when Grimmsnarl Dynamaxes, it gets bigger and more evil. So I figured with Belselk, it'll fit. It'll fit. And also they have the same three-toed claws, and I thought that was a nice touch. Lady Harkin, though, was, I think, an easier fit and also not an easier fit. Also, a lot of the art is going to have weird patches. I should have probably said this at the top. Where there's gray sections, it's literally just because every picture I could find had a solid white background, and I didn't want to have to change this from gray to white because the way I was doing the logo, I was like, yellow, bright yellow on white is, for me, visually hard to see. So I wanted to kind of make it as contrasting as possible. So I went with a darker gray, which means you'll see some, characters that have swaths of what would be considered white that weren't fully separated be missing, which is why her scythe is pitiful. But as far as scythes go, I could have given her Scyther, but I don't think Scyther fits her vibes. Yeah, it's more angry, it's more edgy, but I think Lurantis specifically would fit more because while Lady Harkin is part of the bad guy, she's essentially brainwashed. So I think Lurantis would be like the Pokemon she had beforehand, even though beforehand she was a sword wielder and not a scythe wielder, but, semantics. But I think Lurantis would be like her Pokemon specifically, not only just because of the similar coloring scheme with pink and red, but just in general with how they are both scythe wielders at this point, especially in the game. So we have a combo with Boomerang and Lucide. Boomerang is one of the Quarter Knights. Also, the past couple of guys were Quarter Knights, who joins in kind of after you start picking off members. And I figured he could be represented by, I'm going to butcher the name, Cerulege? Sure. It's the new Gen 9 Ghost, Fire type, whatever, that you get from Charcadet when you evolve it in Violet specifically. And I figured the coloring doesn't make sense in the art that we have, but in the game, he is more of like a black cloth ninja style of a guy. And I figured this would make sense because while he doesn't necessarily dual wield, he also hits like a truck. And I think Cerulege would hit like a truck. He looks like he hits like a truck. He looks big, scary, and beefy. And I figured that would be fitting. And then we have Lucide, the Guardian of Desire. And again, finding a purple wolf is almost impossible. So I figured instead of going and looking through everyone's shiny, I just said, okay, I think Suicune, while not in the same vein of angry looking wolf with the coloring, I think with a purple flowing tail, and especially the new waking moon or whatever form of Suicune, I think would fit more. I just went with the original one just for ease, really, of getting it in here. And I think it fits in terms of they're both doggos, and they both have like weird manes that are flowy and also weird tails that are like flowy. And I think from at least the art, it does look like Lucide has two tails, so the two, ribbon tails might work. Zed is the unofficial Quarter Knight. I don't think he's ever made it on the Quarter Knight squad. He also becomes a party member in Alter Code F, so I gave him Surfetched. He doesn't necessarily wield a shield in the game per se, but he does use a big-ass katana. I don't remember what it's called in the game, but he does wield it, and it's kind of one of his defining moves is the move that he uses. And I figured Surfetched with a giant leak as a shield, or as a sword, would make the most sense, despite the fact he is also fully holding a shield. So for Emma is a party member in the Alter Code F games, but in the first one, she is a mechanic, inventor, engineer, if you will. She's the one who makes the Emma motor. She's the one who makes the Proto Wing with, her other colleagues and the wisdom of Old Man Zeppet, but she's the one who's kind of getting the people off the ground. So I figured, especially since in the Wild Arms Alter Code F game, her ability is download. I figured she would just download a Porygon, or, download the data that would become a Porygon. And I figured that would be fitting for her, while they don't necessarily have computers in that sense, but this is what I'm going off of, and this is what we're doing. And I think Porygon will come in later for a similar reason, something about emulators, I believe. So moving into the other character you can get in Wild Arms Ultra Code F, Jane Maxwell. Her obsession with jewels and money and kind of like treasure is kind of what drives her in the first Wild Arms game. So I gave her Mega Sableye, specifically for just the giant jewel that Sableye has. I think that would be a Pokemon that she would find in her travels, and throughout that, by extension, going to these ancient ruins, Sableye would be happy, she would be happy. It's like kind of like a nice relationship they would have with regards to thieving and being jewel hunters and treasure hunters. And for Jane's bodyguard, we have Magdalene the butler. This is kind of nice, just one-to-one correlation. So we have Indeedee, the butler male version, I believe, because they're both butlers. Magdalene uses a sword. I could have probably given him a sword Pokemon, but I like the specific reference to just having him be a butler with a butler Pokemon. And then we come to Mother. So Mother comes in two varieties, cocoon form and basically consuming her child, Siegfried, what she calls her child, Siegfried, Caterpie form, which is why I gave her Kakuna for the cocoon form on the right and Caterpie for the more Caterpie-like form on the left. I figured the similarities to Caterpie's like yellow circles could be synonymous to the like red dots on Mother's carapace body, whatever you call it. And then as the cocoon, I think the segmentation, this screenshot may not be the best to show the early stages of the cocoon, but I think the cocoon form for Mother fits the best with Kakuna, which means she goes from a cocoon in Kakuna to a Caterpie. She doesn't evolve into a butterfly. She evolves backwards. She regresses, which is hilarious when you're looking at it and actually give it more than like, oh, this is a nice design. It's an interesting thing to think about. Also, Mother as the Caterpie form just gives me Parasite Eve vibes. I don't know why. Probably it's because of the whole transformation from human half to like Caterpie half. But moving to the last couple of characters we have here, we have Big Boy Asgard, which I gave the complete form of Zygarde for. Not to do anything in the coloring. They are both, in my opinion, Earth Golems, because Asgard is the Earth Golem in Wild Arms, and Zygarde being a ground Golem, even though it's a dragon type, I think would be what, if we could go back in the past, is what Asgard would be in the past, if we could see what they were like in their heyday, instead of these more decrepit, corroding kind of machines that we are seeing them in the games. I think this would be a nice one. Also, Asgard, I don't think would own a Pokemon, but as far as like giving them a team or giving them a Pokemon that represents them, I think Zygarde complete form fits the bill quite nice. And then the last guy, this kid, Balloon Boy. I really wanted to give him something else, but Drifloon should probably just come and take him away right now. I kind of wish he went up with a balloon. His whole red balloon is what sparks the game. It's not what cracks the sky per se, but it's what draws the attention to the sky being, raining down on me like a Lady Gaga song. But this kid lets go of his Drifloon, which, sad for the Drifloon, but just lets go of the balloon, and then everyone's attention's drawn up, and they see the sky falling. So this kid brings about the apocalypse single-handedly with a red balloon. But that's the entirety of the Wild Arms 1 game in terms of giving them a team. So let's move on to Wild Arms 2, which is one of, if not my favorite video game. So starting off with the main character himself, we have Ashley Winchester. No relation to the actual Winchester family, but his tools are 3. He's got 3 of them in this game, because there's 6 characters, they gave him one less tool each to kind of spread them out a little bit. So for his tools, he's got the Hon Edge for the hurl knife that he gets in the beginning of the game. His radar Pokemon will be Galarian Meowth. Nope, that's Alolan Meowth, Ryan. Galarian is later. Sorry. I will get the forms mixed up because I love some of the forms, but I also hate some of the forms. And Galarian, keep saying Galarian. Alolan Meowth is hot garbage, but it's what I'm going with for the radar, so it's what I'm going with for Ashley, which I feel bad about. And then for his flare gun, which he gets at the end of the game, we have Magmortar. And the other 3, I'll explain Mighty Ena last, but for the other 3, Darkrai is the shoe-in for me for having it represent Lord Blazer, which is what possesses Ashley in the beginning of the game, and it's very reminiscent of the coloring for his Night Blazer costume when he's transformed and possessed by Lord Blazer himself. So I figured that was a nice tie-in. For Cresselia, I went for the like half dark team, half non-dark team, and I figured Cresselia could be a couple of things. It could help represent Anastasia because he does take the Arget Lom, not as his weapon, but he does, in his mind, lifts it up out of the stone. He's kind of blessed, if you will, by the Arget Lom, and he's also got a deep relationship with Marina, and that's kind of the two things that kind of keep him sane, if you will. So I wanted something to be a contrast to Darkrai, and in my opinion, Cresselia is that, even though Cresselia can't do a damn thing against Darkrai because they're typing, but I like the parallel between Nightmares and like the more serene moon goddess, if you will. And as far as the Mightyena goes, I wanted to give every character from Wild Arms 2 a dog, because in the art and part of the storyline is one of the characters referenced the fact that the logo for ARMS is like a dog with a collar around it. And I wanted to give them that because they all have that in common. They're all members of ARMS, and they're all part of that, dog collar thing. So I all wanted to give them a doggo. And the best doggo, I think, to match what I was trying to go with, half dark and half other, like other types, if you will, was Mightyena. And while he's not super aggressive, I think Mightyena fits better, if you will. Also, I apologize. You may hear trucks and cars moving by because I am on a busy street and I have no soundproofing. Anyway, for Lilka, we're going to go through her tools first. The first one she gets is the Flame Rod, represented by Braixen, the bottom left one from Gen 7, yes, X and Y, maybe? Or is that Gen 6? Gen 6 is X and Y, excuse me. So we have that one. Her next tool is going to be a Ice Rod, which is represented by Frostlass. Braixen is just because it's got the stick in the tail. Frostlass mainly just because it's a nice ice type. I think she would have an ice type. She also hails from the Silige region, which is why I gave her also Starmie, but also, an ice type I think she would find in that area, despite not getting the tool in that area. And then we have her final tool, which is represented by Starmie, which is the Change Rod, changing gems into platforms and vice versa. And I figured the other Pokemon that has a notable gem on it would be Starmie, and being a psychic adjacent type, or, a psychic type, I think that would fit pretty well with Starmie in terms of changing things and being mystical in that sense. And I think it would fit Lilka as a character. For her Banette, she is part of the quest line, if you will, to get Eat My Dust. It's essentially a bomb inside of a doll. And I figured that doll would probably represent a Banette pretty well in terms of it being exploded and then therefore abandoned. And the fact that, again, the doll that she needs is from her homeland of Silige. I think that would fit very well in that thematic sense. For the other couple of characters, Lilka, Brad, Tim, and Cannon, which we'll get into in a second here, they also have one that I gave them based on the ray points that they go through. And in this case, Lilka's is the ray point of Fire, ray point Flan. And I gave her Turtonator for that for a couple of reasons. It's a dragon type, so all of the 4 ray points are going to be represented by a dragon type, as at the end you fight a knight that kind of challenges you, or challenges the character, I should say, based on their ideals, their past, their kind of not trauma in a way, but their character growth moments, if you will. They're big character growth moments for the main 4 cast. The optional character, because they are optional, does not get a ray point, and Ashley, because he's the main character, does not get a ray point. But moving past that, I think Turtonator would fit because it's a fire type, it's a dragon type, and I think it references her umbrella shield with the shell back pretty well. And it's got similar coloring to her umbrella shield and her as a character. And for her doggo, I gave her Doxbun. I am butchering these names. I don't think I've ever heard these spoken out loud, so that's a me thing. But I gave her Doxbun because in her intro, she does go to Ashley's girlfriend, found family, whatever, bakery, and she gets jelly rolls. And I thought that was a nice touch, and Doxbun is baked goods and fully baked goods, so I figured that's a nice relationship. She probably had it as a Fido and evolved it, if you will, but I think Doxbun fits her and her insatiable appetite towards food very, very well. I will say one of the honorable mentions I wanted to give Lilka was an Abra, because she is notoriously bad at teleporting, and I figured that was a nice reference. Even though Abra teleports based on what they want, not necessarily at random or, not landing where they want to go. The fact that it's the teleport Pokemon, it's known for teleporting, is what I wanted to give Loka. But sadly, I didn't want to give her a 7. I didn't want to have her get something else and not have a tool, or not have Bennett to represent Eat My Dust and her that kind of arc there. So moving on to our favorite prisoner, Brad Evans. So his team, his tools, he's got 3. He's got the bombs, the kick boots, and Earthquake, which is a giant hammer that sends seismic shocks out. So for the bombs, I figured since he's an older war vet, similar to Lieutenant Surge in the Pokemon anime, I wanted to have him have an Electrode because I think he would not have the weaker Voltorb. In this case, he's older, he's more experienced. I think he's the oldest member of the cast by far, except for the secret character, which we'll get into, Marival, because she's a vampire and she's hundreds if not thousands of years old by this point. But gave him Electrode for that. For his kick boots, I gave him Hitmonlee. Nice compliment to Rudy's Hitmonchan. But he's really known for kicking things. There's a lot of cutscenes where he'll kick something and something will happen as a result of it. Or something happens and he needs to kick to get out of it. And then for Earthquake, there's no hammer-wielding Pokemon, so I gave him Golem. It's the one Pokemon that I would think he would have as, to represent that Earthquake. And as far as his Raypoint representation, I decided to give him Flygon because it is a dragon ground type, which is his element, in this case, Raypoint Geo, the Raypoint of Earth. So I figured Flygon, being a dragon type, being an Earth type, fit also kind of the storyline Raypoint thing I was going for these guys. Heliolisk is only just due to the fact that he's got bombs around his neck, and I figured the little sun solar panel thing around Heliolisk's neck looks and feels evocative of Brad's, Gaius in his neck, which is the name of the bomb, Gaius. And his doggo, because he is got the thing around his neck, and I think he would have this, is type Null, because I think, again, there's the similarities between him with the neck thing and also him as kind of this more restrained or, going with it to kind of get something out of it and stuff like that. And also, he evolves via friendship. He evolves with Billy with friendship towards the end of the game, and I figured if he had his type no long enough, it would evolve into Savali, which I gave to another character for other reasons, but I think type null fits him more to a T with the neck bomb thing and having a type null kind of being bound by that head cage. So for Tim, this is the best art I could find for him, but for Tim, I wanted a more cute Pokemon. He is the youngest member of the team, so I wanted at most baby Pokemon, but I did obviously make some exceptions here with regards to Alola Ninetales, Altaria, and then Mega Gardevoir. So starting off with, I think, the easiest one, his tools. So I gave him Snubble in lieu of Puka, which is his first tool that he gets when he goes to become a pillar for the world. And Puka is purple and floats, and Snubble is neither, but I figured Snubble looks angry, but is nice, and I think that's a nice relationship with Puka, who is essentially there to to guide Tim to his death, but at the end realizes, it's up to you, dude, and he comes into his own kind of during his arc with the Ray Points, as we'll get into. And then for his second tool, it's a Wind Ballot. It's a giant, feather-like object that's green, which I thought was a nice tie-in to Hoppip, who is neither a feather nor fully green, but it's got the leaf motif on the top with regards to the leaves that Hoppip uses to kind of float around. And I figured that was a nice fitting reference to that kind of element being a wind, grass type, flying grass type. For the Mist Cloak, that his third and final tool, although the Ninetales seemed like a tie-in with the fact that its tail is very reminiscent of mist and flowing kind of mist and kind of stuff like that. So I figured that was a nice relationship there. For Mega Gardevoir, I gave them the Mega form because he is with Colette when he gets the Guardian of Love, Raftina. And Raftina is depicted by a human. I'm not sure if it's always in a wedding dress, but they're always wearing white from what I can recall. And they're very much ethereal, angelic, and I figured Mega Gardevoir looks like they were in a wedding dress. They fit to me as a very ethereal, kind of spiritual Pokemon that would reference the Guardian quite well. For Altaria, because it's a flying dragon type, I thought that was more in line with what Tim would have to reference that ray point wing, specifically the ray point of wind that he goes through the game and fights as the knight. I figured that was a nice relationship between the two, specifically for Tim here, because I don't think anything more mean or aggressive looking besides Snubble, who is mean and aggressive looking, but inside nervous and a softy, would fit Tim. And then for Tim, because he is the youngest, I think he would have a Lillipup for his doggo. He is not new to the team, obviously, but he is young. He's only 12, and he's willing to sacrifice himself to save the world, if you will. But, you know, if it came to that. But I think having Lillipup would be nice because he is a younger Pokemon. I think, if anything, Altaria and Gardevoir would be like granted to him after his trials with Raftina, getting Raftina and getting through the Waypoint Wing. And I think Ninetales, since you get at the end of the game, would fit because he's probably evolved and a little bit stronger than. I probably should have switched the location of Altaria and Hoppip, but I didn't really organize these ones like I did some of the other ones because Wild Arms 2 I felt was a little bit all over the place for me. For Canon, hers requires a lot of explanation because she is quite the complicated character. She starts off as an antagonist to the team of Ashley, Lilka, Brad, and Tim. She eventually joins us, which is why I gave her a couple of dark types, but she is also bionic. Bionic? I don't know how to say that word, I'm realizing. She's part robot, I should say. She's got some biotic... No, biotic sounds wrong. Anyway, she's got some robot parts, as you can see, with her chain or like whip arm with the little dagger blade thing. She's got some robot parts to her. She's a little bit of a cyborg, if you will. So I gave her Iron Moth and Iron Valiant to be a nice little nod to the fact that she's not fully human. And she's changed parts of herself. But for her tools specifically, I gave her Sneasel. I know it's not a hook shot. But it's got sharp claws. You can climb ice. It's fitting. And I also think Sneasel fits her because it is kind of a dark type that has, you know, some metallic-ish pieces to it, even though I think they might be ice, but they might be steel, who knows. And then for her skates, because when you get them, you really go over lava a lot, I gave her Roly-Poly. It's a rock type. I'm not sure if it's a fire type here, but it might be. But I gave her Roly-Poly only because it wheels around on itself. It's got the little wheel that it runs on, and it's a bunch of rocks, which I think fits her in terms of her skates, if you will. And then for her last tool, which is the jump boots, which is what I doubled up with Iron Moth for. There's not a lot of jumping Pokemon, and I don't think, like, if I did use Spoink, I think, later. But I don't think Spoink would fit here. And I also don't think Spoink would fit in the next person who gets the jump boots, so I just avoided it entirely. So I gave Iron Moth to represent her jumping through the air a little bit. Iron Moth floats, you know, kind of hovers, if you will. So makes sense. Cannon's Ray Point, though, is the Ray Point Muse, the Ray Point of water. So I gave her Kingdra. It's a water dragon type. And I think that would fit her in terms of her Pokemon. It's a little more aggressive than Horsey or Seadra. And I think for all these Pokemon, they're all, in a way, kind of not evil looking, but more edgy, more a little aggressive, which is also why I gave her Absol for her doggo, to reference the fact that she starts off as a villain, as a little rough around the edges. And I think as a whole, fits the canon aesthetic, if you will. So, the only character I didn't go for tools in this game is Marivel. I gave her Pokemon based on what she has for her summons, which are Drillbur, Houndour, and Golett. And I gave her 2 Magnemite to represent her weapons, Hob and Knob. One of the few weapons I think I could give. It's not duplicate per se. I know it's literally 2 Magnemites, but I think I could have made one shiny, and it would have probably fit in the form one, if you will. There's no other form besides Sandy Shocks, which I didn't want to give her because I have a reason for giving her all the baby Pokemon. And then for her doggo, because she is the blue mage and can absorb enemies' abilities, I gave her Smeargle for that exact reason, that Smeargle is essentially the blue mage Pokemon, absorbing other Pokemon's moves by using his sketch ability. So for the summons that she has Quebly, which is essentially a mole, if you will. It's a mole robot summon thing, which I gave her Drillbur for. She has Lucifer, which I gave her Houndour for, because Lucifer obviously references, Satan, the devil, kind of stuff like that. And I think the most devilish doggo Pokemon that's a, kind of a baby would be Houndour. And then for Golett, similar to why I gave, Golurk, Golett is the baby form, excuse me. Similar to why I gave Golurk to Cecilia to represent the Earth Golem, Marvel can summon Asgard twice over, so I figured having Golett for her would represent her very well in that aspect. And the reason I gave her all pre-evolutions, I know Smeargle doesn't have an evolution, but pre-evolutions is because she's a vampire. I think if she had any teams in the past, she probably wouldn't have the same ones in the future, because they're not going to last as long as she is. I don't know how the lifespan of Pokemon is, but I doubt it's hundreds of years. So a little bit dour of a note as we move into the next character, but I figured she would have all the new Pokemon that she would get when she gets her summons. She wouldn't have like fully evolved Pokemon. I don't even think she would have them fully evolved by the end of the game because of when you get her, but I think this would be a team that she would fit well with, if you will. So moving into, I think, my least favorite character in this game, Marina and the Diamonds. I gave her, I can't say Marina and not say the Diamonds, so she's always Marina and the Diamonds to me. But she also fits because one of her things is the Empatite, which I gave her for Carbink. I'm going to butcher the names on some of these things, like the Empatite. I don't know how to say it. I've never known how to say it because it's all text to me, so I just know how to read it in my brain, But I gave her Fido because she is a baker in the game. She works with her aunt, I believe, as in the bakery that Ashley also lives at, and she gets the Carbink for the Empatite. It's a little blue crystal that Ashley finds and gives to her that connects them. Carbink is the only thing with a blue crystal that I thought, she'd probably have, and I think Ashley would literally just give her the Carbink. She's like, hey, I found this for you. It's full of Empatite. It's full of what we can use to talk to each other, and I think that would be a nice gift Pokemon for Marina and the Diamonds, which is also why it's Marina and the Diamonds. So, Odessa, the main villains of Wild Arms 2, we have Vinsfeld, Kina, and Antinora. So I think the easiest one to go over would be Vinsfeld first. Probably Kina would be easier, but Vinsfeld, I gave him Dragapult for a couple reasons. This art has his shoulder pauldrons, and I think that's evocative of Dragapult's head thing. He's also got the ship, the Heimdallgazo, which is also evocative of Dragapult as being kind of a ship-like ghost Pokemon. And because it's a ghost, Vinsfeld dies, but comes back as a ghost because he has unfinished business when Heimdallgazo goes down, so I figured, let's make it a ghost. It's a ghost dragon ship thing, which I think would fit Vinsfeld to a T, and I quite like that. Kena is the easiest. Kena has Randolph the Magic Key, and the only key Pokemon I have, which is also the similar thing that regular Pat gave to Sora, was Klefki, because Klefki is the key Pokemon. It looks like a key, it collects keys. I think Klefki would literally just steal Randolph the Magic Key, and Kena would be upset by that. But that's the only thing I really went for with Kena. And Antinora was, I think, one of the harder ones for me to give. There's no real equivalent to her weapons or abilities, but I went with her abilities specifically. So her weapon is thin, razor-sharp wires that she sends magic pulses through to affect status ailments on the cast of Wild Arms 2 when they fight. There's no Pokemon that does that. I mean, String Shot, maybe, but String Shot doesn't send magical energy through it. So I decided to go with Butterfree, solely for the fact that Butterfree gets both, all three, Poison Powder, Sleep Powder, Sunspore, I believe. But also, just for the coloring, the eyes from Butterfree to the hair of Antinora, the white wings to Butterfree to the white outfit of Antinora, especially in this art from Million Memories, I think fits quite well. And the fact that I think she would have a Butterfree just for the fact that she is like the status user, status ailment fighter in this group. I mean, yeah, the other ones can inflict status ailments too, but that's her whole shtick, is magic wires that she sends magical energy through to inflict status ailments. That's her whole shtick, and I think that would fit Butterfree. Let me know, and you can let me know for any of these characters as well, if you think there are better Pokemon I could have or should have been giving to them. I welcome any and all feedback on these. This is just an exercise in me giving Pokemon to my favorite characters, or all of the characters in most of the characters in Wild Arms. I will skip Scott and Tony because I don't care about them. I'm sorry. It's just my humble opinion that I don't think any of them do much in the game. I mean, yeah, they're there for Tim, but I don't think they deserve Pokemon. If anything, they'll just can have like random, Patrat, Rattatas, Raticates, just random Pokemon that they'll find on the fields. So the other two characters from Odessa that I couldn't fit all in one slide are Ptolemaea and Judecca. Ptolemaea I gave Excadrill for, just for the fact that they've got the drilling thing on their arm, and I think that fits when Excadrill starts drilling, how it starts spinning and kind of all forms together with its head and its hands into something evocative of that drilling arm thing. And then Judecca was hard. There's no gun Pokemon, or there's no Pokemon that uses their glasses in any way, shape, or form, or references being like glasses of like adjacent, if you will. Maybe Mr. Rhyme, maybe. I don't recall their design quite off the top of my head, which will show up later, of course. I think literally the next slide. But for Judecca, I went with Fortress because it looks like it's got a bunch of cannons on it, despite it not really being a cannon. And it's also the two eyes that we see look like glasses, in my opinion, with the little black outlines. So I figured that would be a nice, evocative reference to Judecca in that sense. Speaking of, so facts, there is no monocle on Mr. Rhyme. For Irving, I gave Mr. Rhyme for the sole fact that he is with a cane. That's it. That's it. They both have canes. That's all I really wanted to go for that. For Altacia, I have two Pokemon. They're one Pokemon each for two different reasons, I would say. Excuse me, Altacia, I gave Gardevoir for the dress that she wears. The green and the pink are similar enough in my mind. But I also gave her Swalot because of the whole plot that she has with the, encroaching parallel universe in the game. She is the carrier of that because of what Irving does. So I figured Swalot having basically a black hole inside of him he constantly eats, I think would be fitting. Then we have Anastasia, and again, Lucide. Lucide not pictured, of course, but Lucide is just going to be Suicune again. But for Anastasia, because she is from the past, I gave her Zacian with the sword. Because Zacian's sword is a relic, if you will. They're the relic of the king. And the little hair things with a tail, I think, makes sense. Especially the pre-form of Zacian, but the pre-form will also be used for this reason. But I think that would make sense with regards to the Argent Lom being reference to the King's Sword. And also, just Anastasia as a whole. Okay, and then finally we have Lizard. Two simple Pokemon, and I will be completely honest, I had to look up the Pokemon on the right's name because I just don't know it. But I went with Charmeleon and Drizzile, which is the one on the right. Charmeleon for Ard and Drizzile for Liz. So please bear with me. I'm going to take like maybe a minute before we get into Wild Arms 3. I need some water. I am not editing this. This is just me off the cuff kind of recording. So bear with me for like maybe 2 minutes. I'll include a timestamp so when you guys can come back, but I'm going to pause just the voice real quick and I'll be back in like a minute or two. And we're back. We're back jumping into Wild Arms 3. So, for the theme for Wild Arms 3, I went real simple. They have horses. They ride horses. I went with horses. I also realized I did not include Lombardia in this. That is a woe on me. If anything, I'll probably give Lombardia some sort of dragon flying type, I guess, that has wings that I didn't use here. I don't know which one off the top of my head. Maybe Dragonite. I think that's the only one I could really give based on the ones I've used already. Maybe Rayquaza, because it's more of a dragon type associated with like legend. Maybe Rayquaza, but it's not featured here because I didn't think about Lombardia until basically this moment when I was talking about ride vehicles. So for the horses, I'm going to start off with that since I started talking about it. Virginia, I gave Galarian Rapidash, similar to the dress, the pink-purple, if you will. I just think it fits her better because she does ride a white horse. And Galarian Rapidash is clearly, a white horse here. White unicorn, if you will, but same thing. We'll do the tools last for them, since I'll go through the character, like touches, the styles, plot stuff first in this round. So for Virginia, I gave her Roselia for the fact that she has roses and uses twin pistols in this game. So I gave her the Roselia because it's got 2 roses, and there's literally a red rose on one of her holsters. I think both of her holsters have the red rose. I could be wrong on that. I also gave her Meganium for the fact that her father places a white flower on her mother's grave, and that's kind of her big character moment when she realizes that her father is still alive, and why she wants to go out and explore the world is just to find him and, kind of be her own person. One of her famous quotes, though, which is what the tools are going to be referencing as well, is, I want to spread my wings and fly on my own, or spread my wings and fly. And so I gave her all bird Pokemon because all of her tools are crests, and crests that she either throws in the air for 2 of them, or presses to her body and glides through the air. So starting off with the Flame Crest, her first tool that she gets is Fletchinder, which I think is fitting because it's a flying type. I didn't want to give her Talonflame because I don't think it fits her aesthetic per se. I don't think she'd have what, in my opinion, is kind of a garish Pokemon design. I mean, say what you want about Galarian Rapidash, but, Talonflame looks too aggressive for somebody like Virginia. I think she'd have more. I know Fletchinder is also angry as face as ever, but I think she would have the middle stage, if you will. I also gave her Swellow for the fact that she does have the Gale Crest, the one that goes fast. I think Swellow, while not the fastest bird, I think it's quite a fast bird, and I like the way Swellow looks. It's not the shade of like purple as her dress, but I think it fits her as a character. And then for her last crest, similar to Lilka's Change Rod, we have the Change Crest, which is represented by Xatu. I kind of gave anything mystical the psychic or fairy type for the most part. I gave her Xatu because it doesn't look like it, no, but I think Xatu is fitting for being a psychic bird that isn't Lugia. I don't know if there's any other psychic birds. I mean, there's Braviary, but I don't think Braviary would fit for the same reason I didn't give her Talonflame. I just think Xatu fits the vibe of the Change Crest a little bit more, in my opinion. Moving on to not her love interest, but kind of her love interest, Jet Enduro. Because of that, I gave him the regular Rapidash because he has a light brown horse, which I gave to somebody else, the only other brown horse. I didn't realize there was so few horse Pokemon. I mean, there's other horse Pokemon, as we'll see, but the other ones are ice type and ghost type, which I don't think would fit as well here. And then for his character specific Pokemon, I gave him Greninja for the scarf similarity. I know there's another scarf wear in the later game, Wild Arms 5, but I think Greninja will fit him better here. The other reason I gave him Greninja is because of the ability Protean. While Jet doesn't necessarily change his typing per se, he is, as what is referenced by Castform here, the kind of oddball, if you will. He is manufactured. He is a human that is made to hold the blueprint of what Fulgaia is in his memories. Not memories that he has, because he is actually an amnesiac, because he doesn't remember much of anything. But he does have some memories, and I think because he is meant to hold the blueprints of that being a made human, I think Protean as the ability will fit, and also Castform would fit, because he has the, essentially, data or blueprint of what Fulgaia was previously, which fits in to Castform, which was made to reflect the weather. And I think, while not necessarily specifically weather specific or related, I think it's a nice parallel between the two being made for environmental purposes. And then moving on to his tools, he's got the Boomerang, the Radar, and the Jump Boots. And all 3 of them are hard to represent because there's no Pokemon that wields Boomerangs, Radar specific, or Jumping. So I went with specifically Marowak for the Boomerang because Marowak has famously known for the Bone Meringue move. To round out the final Radar Pokemon, we have Galarian Meowth, which is, I think, more fitting for what Jet would have, because Jet is an angry little boy throughout the entire game. He's rude, he's aggressive, he's kind of like the odd one out, if you will, between the 4 of them. And I gave him Cinderace only because the boots that Cinderace, or the shoes that Cinderace have, I think would be a nice parallel between the Jump Boots and him. I know Scorbunny is also known for hopping around in the pre-evolution, so I think Cinderace would probably keep something like that. and he's also a soccer player, so you gotta be doing some sort of jumping, I guess, maybe over balls or over character or other humans when you're playing soccer. I've never played it. I wouldn't know. So, moving into Gallows. Gallows was a little bit harder. So his horse, in this case, is Zebstrika, because Gallows rides a black horse in the game. I know it's reference of a zebra, but it's horse enough for what this purpose is. Which brings me to the other two in the top row. We have Caracosta, and I'm guessing it's called Origin Form Dialga from Legends Arceus. So for Caracosta, his whole intro, he has the Aqua Mist rune, which is the rune of Sturdark. And I think having the turtle represent that, because while not specifically tied to Gallows per se, he does have it as the intro rune that he has, and he is also using the water element in the intro as part of his prologue boss fight. So I think that's a nice fit for him. And then for Origin Form Dialga, I went with the Origin Form because in the Infinitum, I believe, he goes through a big character moment with the Time Guardian as he banishes essentially Asgard to another dimension, as Asgard is more of an automaton robot guy who is in league with the villains, who is also not featured here because, again, if I had to give Asgard a form, just give him complete form Zygarde. But because he is referenced to the Time Guardian, the Time Medium, if you will, the Stone Slab, Dan Dyram, who is a cat. There are no cats with this time association in Pokemon, unfortunately, so I went with Origin Form Dialga. And then for his tools, I went with Galarian Darumaka, the ice one, for the Snow Doll. I don't remember the tool name specifically. It's the Frost Doll. For the Steady Doll, I went with Beldum, because I think out of anything that is going to be floating, Beldum is the most representative of what a Steady Doll will be. It looks like a Milkmaid when it's in the Steady Doll form with a hat and like the fact that it's got the dress and it sways a little bit side to side. But Beldum, I think if you had it more oriented upright, would be representative of a head and a body that is floating. And it can move stuff, it can grab stuff. I think Beldum would work there. For the Kramer dolls, since they summon enemies, I went with Shuppet. Only because it's a ghost type, and the person who has the Kramer dolls literally wants to get rid of it. And I figured, well, you didn't really want a Shuppet. You don't really want a ghost type hanging around per se. So I think it's a nice fit for it. And again, the tools, feel free to let me know if there's any Pokemon, either with the constraints or without the constraints that I've imposed on myself, that you may think would fit better for some of the tools, or even just any of the characters, really. And moving on to the final protagonist of Wild Arms 3, we have Clive Winslet. At least the protagonist that we play, I should say. So starting off with his horse, he's got Mudsdale, the only brown horse that I could find besides its baby form, Mudsbray, which I didn't think would work well for any of these people to expect to ride on them. But Mudsdale, because it's a brown horse and it fits him. Moving into his character arc moment, I would say, he's got Kangaskhan, because his whole arc revolves around him and the trio above, but also his wife and child. And I figured, being Kangaskhan and the little baby Kangaskhan, I think those fit very well in terms of how they interplay with one another. And because he's holding the giant sniper rifle, I had to give him Dynamax Form Inteleon, because while he's on a perch, sure, he's got a big old water sniper. So they fit together, you know. As far as Clive's tools, he's got the bombs, he's got the might gloves, and he's got a grappling hook. So the bomb, because he is also a archaeologist, if you will, he is a researcher of historical events and history and ruins. I think he would stumble upon Hisuian Voltorb and use that in lieu of his bombs. For the might gloves, he has Machoke, which are essentially just gloves that lets him move heavy boxes. Machoke is frequently seen in construction fields, moving stuff, doing things with muscles and stuff like that. And then for the grapple hook, again, no hookshot Pokemon, so I just went with Steelix, mainly because he gets it in a ruin, and I think Steelix would fit there, while not necessarily being as representative as a grapple hook in the sense that you need to use it to grapple and move objects with, or move to objects with. I think it fits for the shape and the fact that it's steel. So this next character you may hate me for, but I'm going to go for Maya Schrodinger next, which is representative of a Ditto. And let me explain before you pop off in the comments below. I gave Maya a Ditto because when she reads a book, she is able to copy the protagonist of that book's abilities and use them herself. And because she is literally copying them, I thought Ditto would be the best. She's also a treasure hunter, like her previous reincarnation, if you will, of, Calamity Jane Maxwell. But I think Ditto would fit here more. And yes, Maya is obsessed with gems, just like Calamity Jane, but I think for her abilities and just to give them kind of one Pokemon each for these kind of side characters that I don't necessarily want to build a full team for, I think it fits. I know there's probably more Pokemon that she could probably have. She's got Shady the cat. You can give her a cat as that reference. You can give her a team of 4 for her team as itself, but I just wanted to give her a singular Pokemon like the rest of her compatriots. So moving into her younger brother, we have Alfred Schrodinger. So Alfred's whole shtick is that he is kind of an inventor. He uses bombs. He makes bombs. So I gave him my cargo for a couple of reasons. One of the things is I think he's a little bit more shy and introverted than his older sister, but if he needs to, he will step up. But one of his character-defining moments is when he strikes a match and focuses his anxieties into that. I think Mag Cargo would be beneficial to that. Only because like Mag Cargo in the art here has that flame already protruding from the rock face. But I think it fits because he also can learn Explosion, Mag Cargo specifically, not Alfred. But I think it fits for a demolitions expert, if you will, to have, a lava Pokemon like Mag Cargo. So moving into the butler, Todd Dukakis, I don't know. He's got Bouffalant because they both have big ol' afros and he has swords, which I think are evocative of his Bouffalant's sword spike, head spikes. Why Bouffalant did not evolve from Tauros, I do not know, and I still regret that to this day, Game Freak. But moving on to Shady 1000. I didn't realize Shady the cat had a last name, but Shady is famously known for being A cat, and B, using fire and ice magic, and flying, technically. So, 3 things, I should say. So, I gave him Silvally, but I couldn't give him a fire and ice Silvally because you can only hold 1 item. So I gave him Fire and Ice Silvally as 2 Pokemon. Not necessarily that he would have both, but I think he would switch between plates depending on, or Silvally would switch between plates depending on what mood, Shady was in that day. And moving into more of the outright villains of the squad, we have the Prophets. Starting from left to right, we have Malik, Leehalt, and Melody. So for these 3, I have a reason for them. So for Melody, on the right, you have Yuxi, who is the Lake Guardian of Emotion. For Malik, on the left, you have Mesprit, the Lake Guardian of Knowledge. And in the middle, you have Azulf, the Lake Guardian of Willpower. So, aesthetic-wise, I wanted to switch Mesprit and Yuxi to the other 2 for their hair colors or their costume colors, but they wouldn't fit thematically. So Malik's whole thing is he's obsessed with memories, and I figured that's a nice parallel to Knowledge, even though maybe not a one-to-one parallel, if you will. I thought it was nice. For Melody on the right, she is obsessed with beauty, and I figured that is an emotional aspect to her and an emotional response from people to think someone is, beautiful. You might have either like head over heels swooning or lust or that or the other, so I figured emotions would be in tie-in. Leehalt is the only one who gets his character color match, which is with Azulf, the willpower Pokemon. He is the de facto leader of the Prophets. He's the one kind of calling the shots, if you will. And I figured Azulf would make a nice rounding out of the trio here. They're also all technically ghosts. They're all dead at this point because of the accident. So the fact that they're alive, I wish I could have given them a ghost type that would reference both their kind of interests and desires for characters as like character growth. But sadly, I went with the Lake Guardians because I think that fits them a little bit more. And they can also teleport. So they also teleport both the Prophets and the Lake Guardians, and I think that's a nice touch. So moving into the other first villains we find, we have Janice, Dario, and Romero in that order from left to right. So for Janice, While he does have a monstrous form, I decided to stick him with the human form for now and give him King Gambit. He is the leader of Dario and Romero, and he is a little bit of something of like a dark horse throughout the game. He is kind of weaseling his way to be, higher than he should be, higher status than he should be. I think that kind of fits him in terms of King Gambit and King Gambit's like evolutionary status. Moving on to Dario, the one in the middle, he is known for, in battle, zipping up his fly to get ready. And I figured that would be a perfect parallel to Scrafty, who is also known for having baggy pants, picking up his pants, stuff like that, as you can see with his suspenders. So, Alolan Rattata might seem like an odd choice for Romero. Romero is the nervous one. He has to calm his nerves before he gets ready. And the fact that he's got like little like knives or whatever, bringing knives to a gunfight, I don't know why. But his heart scarf, his knives, I think are representative of like Alolan Rattata's claws. And the little ear tufts and tail tufts could represent like the tuft of his bandana, if you will. So that's the main bad guy trio there. So all we have left for Wild Arms 3 is Beatrice and the Nightmares. So Beatrice being a demon who is inhabiting electrical currents, electrical waves, memories, dreams. She is like static. If static shock, not static shock, if static, it's like TV static was a ghost, this is TV static as a ghost, as a human, and a little child. So I gave her Rotom. Specifically, the first form of Rotom, as her, specifically. And because the Nightmares all have like elemental associations with them, fire, ice, water, ground or earth, light, dark, gravity, time, luck, stuff like that, I decided to give them all the Rotom forms. I know there's more Nightmares than there are Rotom forms, but I gave them Rotom Fan, Rotom Frost, Rotom Wash, Rotom Heat, and Rotom Mow, just to give them a little bit of variety in this case. And also the fact that you fight them in Nightmare Castle, and it's in this kind of subspace in the electrical field, if you will. It's all TV staticky and stuff. I think it fits for this kind of vibe, if you will. Before we... Oh, sorry. I missed somebody, obviously. We have Werner Maxwell, who's also famously a ghost. So I gave him Zoroark for that purpose specifically, just because he is a ghost, and also a little bit of an illusion, if you will, in terms of the fact that he is dead, but he pretends to be real. And then Yamask, because he does, not necessarily representative of the mask per se. He is there in spirit, and I think he would be, if he had turned into a Pokemon, he would be literally Yamask specifically, wearing the face of who he was as a human, maybe looking at his past and his life and maybe regretting that as a character. Sorry. I thought we were done with Wild Arms 4. I forgot about Werner. Werner is kind of like the dark horse here. I know there's also like a Mariel clone in this game, from Wild Arms 1 to this game, in terms of Floret, something like that. She starts with an F, and is like flower related. Flora. I think her name is Flora. Just give her Marivel's team from Wild Arms 1. I think that would fit. So, moving into Wild Arms 4, before we get in there, I have a preface thing to say. I realize my allergies are starting to kick up. I mowed the lawn earlier today, so bear with me as we get through the next 3 games, Wild Arms 4, 5, and Crossfire. If I sniffle, if I bump the mic with blowing my nose, I apologize. I don't have the time, money, or patience to edit this out. And also, I don't have the editing software. This is just, again, ramble thoughts of why I gave these Pokemon to this specific, character, this, that, and the other. So, just wanted to explain what you may be hearing, or if you hear me sniffle, or if you hear me sound a little bit different from when I started. My allergies, despite me taking my allergy medication, are kicking my ass. So, we can do it. We're more than halfway through at this point, or we're exactly halfway through, because we did Wild Arms 1, 2, and 3, technically Ultra Code F, if you will, and now we have 4, 5, and Crossfire. So, yeah, we're about halfway through now. So, for Wild Arms 4, I figured we'll start off with Jude, of course. So, this game has another preface I should make here while we're on a character. They don't have tools per se. They have items you can use in the room, but they're not tools as the previous 3 had in terms of associated with a character and are permanent. I know the teardrop is questionable because you could lose it and get it back, but anyway, you don't get that with Wild Arms 4. You also don't get that with Wild Arms 5, which we'll get into more specific why later. But for Jude, the things you do get with him are the ability to accelerate and the ability to essentially just pick up items and use them. So that's essentially it. So the only thing I could really associate that with for Jude is the fact that he has Accelerator for Ninjask, which is, I think, and I might be wrong stat wise, the fastest Pokemon that's not like an uber legendary or mythical Pokemon. I still might be wrong in that sense, but I gave him Ninjask to represent the gotta go fast mentality that he has in his like Accelerator form. For Charizard, it's purely just based on coloration. The teal matches the pants. The pants here are a little bit more green than they are in the game, in my opinion. The orange for the jacket. That's basically it. It's kind of him as a Pokemon, if you will. Not Charizard from the anime, because the Charizard from the anime is kind of a dick, but Jude is, I think, got a fiery spirit in him, For Braviary, I know we're going all over the place, but for Braviary, it's kind of similar. Not coloration specifically, but just because Jude is brave. He steps up. He is the one to lead the charge. He's not the one to be sitting around just kind of like questioning himself. He's like, no. He literally jumps into a river to save a dog for no other reason, just to save the dog. Stuff like that. Should have probably included a dog for that, but we'll go to the other three. We'll start off with the bottom left with Trevenant. I couldn't find a Forest Ranger Pokemon to reference his job at the end because Jude, I had to do a lot of stretching and pulling because the other characters, I think, had more concrete themes that I could work with. Jude, because he is wielding a sword and a gun, means that I couldn't really pick out his weapon to reference in this game or in this exercise. So I went with his job or his career aspiration by the end of it. He's a forest ranger. Essentially, he works with animals. He's got his little cabin in the woods. I think he would befriend a Trevenant. I know Trevenant here is aggressive because, child spirits and all that stuff, but I think he would befriend the Trevenants in there, and one of them probably take a shining to him more. We'll skip Cobalion for a second. We'll get to Glameow first. In Wild Arms 5, there's cameos from all the characters, which we'll touch on again later when we get to Wild Arms 5, but one of Jude's quests from that game, which I know I'm bridging games, if you will, is to rescue a kitten, and Glameow was that kitten, in my opinion. So, the elephant in the room that I mentioned earlier, Cobalion, I wanted to give these 4 characters, since there's 4 characters, and they, I think, in my opinion, align better with the Swords of Justice than the Wild Arms 3 cast, of those 4 characters. I decided to give Jude Cobalion, as I feel Cobalion is like the leader of the 3 Musketeers, and we'll get into the other ones here shortly, but I also think the reason why I gave the other 2 main Swords of Justice what I gave them, because they fit more thematically. And then for Yuli got the cast off, which I think is next anyway. So Yuli got Keldeo. I don't know if this is the Resident form, Justice form, but this is Keldeo with the spike. Serves 2 roles here. One, the unofficial Swords of Justice of the 3 Musketeer trio, and also because, I needed it for something which we'll get into when we get into it. But Hoopa, probably the easiest to explain. Yuli's weapon in the game is rings. She attacks with them, she defends with them, and there's no Pokemon I would associate more with rings than Hoopa. If I could give her Sonic, I would give her Sonic, but we're not doing Smash characters, this is Pokemon, so if I could have given her Sonic, I would have. For her other 5 Pokemon, I decided to go for the summons, because there are 5 in that game. You have Earth, Fire, Wind, Water, and Healing. I think that's all of them. So for Earth, Grudajef or Grudiev, whichever you prefer, I gave her Great Tusk. For Fengalon, the Wind Tiger, I gave her Landorus, but specifically the Therian form because it looks like a tiger-ish. I know it's a ground type. Where else are Wind Tigers going to run if not on the wind or on the ground? So being a ground flying type, I think fits. For Moorgalt, the fire chicken, I gave her the other fire chicken, Moltres. And then for Sturdark, because I gave Caracosta to Gallows, I decided to give her specifically Blastoise because I think they do sometimes shoot cannons instead of giant tidal waves of water, so I felt that was fitting. And then for Odoric, the healing one, it is a unicorn, which is why I gave Keldeo in this form to Yuli. I don't remember the name of the form. I didn't write it down, so that's on me. But I know it's not the base form of Keldeo. It's the special form. I think it's like the resonant form. I might be wrong. So moving into Arnaud Vasquez, he is the other hard one, I would say. He has got 2 Pokemon here that represent his personality in Mr. Mime and Alakazam. And he's got 2, maybe 3, if you will, that represent his weapon per se. I would say 2. And he's got 1 represent his hair swoop, and then 1 is a sword of justice, which is, Virizion. So Skarmory and Decidueye are like what I would associate with. He uses like wings or arrows, not wings, but like arrows, not arrows, feathers, feather-like things to attack. I think they're knives, but I think they're like sharpened feathers. I believe it's what they're referenced or what they look like in the game. So I gave him Skarmory because Skarmory has iron feathers or steel feathers. And Decidueye because, yes, while it's a bow and arrow, he does fling his own arrows that are made out of grass and stuff like that, but he does fire them off. Mr. Mime and Alakazam are reference to his I am proud of everything above the neck, or whatever the line is. I take pride in everything above my neck because he's got his razor sharp intellect and stuff like that. And then Staraptor is because he's got the little side part bangs, but I also gave him 3 bird Pokemon. Skarmory, Staraptor, and Decidueye, even though Decidueye is a ghost type, because he is a pilot. His father was a pilot. He taught him how to fly, and that's kind of one of his big character movement moments, if you will, is having to pilot a plane to save his friends. So Virizion, I kind of just was like the leftover, if you will, Swords of Justice for him. It kind of looks like it would fly, kind of looks like a ship, or like an airship, or flying saucer, flying plane, stuff like that, with his little head wings and stuff like that. I know Iron Virizion, or whatever it's called, is the thing, but I didn't think that would fit per se. It might even be better typing per se, but I didn't really look into the new Paradox Pokemons other than the ones I've used here. And for the final character we have Raquel Applegate. She has, granted, 1 big sword, so instead of that, I gave her both Mega Kangaskhan and Doughblade to represent 2 things of her. 1, the fact that she uses a big-ass sword, and 2, that she can interrupt people with her ability and attack twice, essentially, or attack as many times as you have the force points to spend on her. So I gave her Mega Kangaskhan because both the mama and the child attack, and Doughblade because I think she would be, like, representative of that double-hit combo, if you will. And Polion is also kind of why I gave her that, is the sword aspect. And then for Serena, it's just because I like the fact that Raquel is just a queen in battle. She can, like, solo most bosses. She's, like, basically needed for the optional bosses, the hard bosses in the game. I think she's great at that. And a bit of a stretch. She's not the greatest cook, so I didn't want to give her Flapple, but she does like beautiful things, so I wanted that with Whimsicott, basically. That's essentially it. Whimsicott, my favorite Pokemon. Raquel, best girl. So, in my mind, it makes sense. And then she has Terrakion because she is, like I said, the hardest hitting person in the whole squad. Jude might be the second. Arno, magically, of course. And Yuli, both, if you will. Magically, defensively, if you will. But Terrakion, I gave her to her because she's a tank. Terrakion looks like a tank. So I figured it was a nice combination of the 2. Moving into the other characters in this game, we're going to start off with the Brionac forces, aka the antagonists of Wild Arms 5. So we have Lambda and Farmel. Lambda I gave Corviknight, Farmel I gave Shield form, Aegislash. Specifically for Farmel, starting with her, I think the shield is very reminiscent of the shield that Aegislash has, the same one that she has. It's got, like, I know it's probably not visible in the art here, but when I'm looking at it closely, she's got, like, 3 circles in the middle. It's kind of got the same, like, swoopy effect, if you will. It's a little bit more spirally on hers, but similar to what Aegislash has. Corviknight is a little bit more simpler. It's a evil-looking fucking bird. It's got armor. It's a knight. He's basically the knight, if you will. He's got a chain, a whip, and a big old blade. And he's got the little shoulder pauldrons, shoulder pads, so I figured that was reminiscent of this form of Corviknight, this image of Corviknight with the shoulder wing things and little shoulder accessory, if you will. Moving into other Brionac forces, the other 2, I would say, main characters, we have Gon. And Gon, I gave him 2 Zweilous because his nicknames or codenames are the Double Dragoon and Twin Gunner. So I figured, okay, Dragoon references dragons. I wanted a 2-headed dragon, gave him Zweilous, and because he's a twin gunner, I wanted him to have 2. And I know it's the duplicate rule, if you will, but if they're on the same person, I think having fine if it's something in pairs, like Marivel from Wild Arms 2 had to Magnemite for Hob and Nob, because Hob and Nob are two floating, like, spherical automaton robot things that she attacks with. I think that's fine, and I think this is fine as well. Again, debate me in the comments if you will. I will take any criticism on this. If you think I could have given him something out better, let me know. And then for Kresnik, we have Escavalier. He is the Lance of Brionac, if you will. I think that's his title, is the Lance of Brionac, or Brionac's Lance. And Escavalier is the only Lance Pokemon that we have, so I think it works. And the fact he's also on a motorcycle is kind of like the little spiral of the shell for, Escavalier. I think it fits. It's not the best. Again, there's no motorcycle Pokemon to give per se, so I thought this would work for all intents and purposes for Kresnik here. So I debated on putting these guys in because, one, I don't remember them. Two, I don't remember their names. I remember Johnny on the right because you fight him like 3 times. But Balgane, I couldn't even tell if you fought him, where you fought him, how you fight him, anything like that. So Balgane gets Mega Scizor only because he's got a giant chainsaw and I think he's part robot. I think the wiki said he's part robot, but I don't believe that. But he might be. I don't remember Wild Arms 4 that much. It's the game I've played the least, along with Wild Arms 5. I've beaten them fully twice now. And I think I may have started a playthrough of them both once, but I don't think I've ever finished them. So it is what it is. But as far as Johnny goes, I gave him Beedrill for the fact that he's got a submachine gun, which Morpeko is hiding the end of it. But he's got a submachine gun, and I think the multiple stingers of Beedrill is reminiscent of that, because they could probably also shoot him with pin missile and stuff like that. It kind of makes sense. And also the fact that you fight him multiple times, I think he'd have like that kind of staying power that, Mega Beedrill has. Coloring wise, he is a dead ringer for Morpeko. The black overcoat, the purple shirt, blue jeans or whatever. But Morpeko, I think, is Johnny's like Pokemon 1-to-1. It's Johnny as a Pokemon. Let's just be real. So Belial and Scythe. So I got into a rabbit hole with these two because I thought Scythe was the actual Crimson Noble vampire, which is what Marival is. No. Neither of them are Crimson Nobles. Belial is a demon, according to the wiki, and I did not know that. And Scythe thinks he's a Crimson Noble, and he gets powers because he absorbs and drinks Belial's blood because he thinks he's a Crimson Noble. Apparently, I don't remember Wild Arms 4 at all, because I thought one of them were an actual Crimson Noble. But anyway, Belial as a demon has massive control over space, so I gave her Palkia, the space Pokemon. She can make pocket dimensions. She can make things materialize, dematerialize. She has like a pocket universe that she just made to trap us in, and we eventually escape because she was expending so much energy on creating that pocket universe and maintaining it that, she was weaker. And then for Scythe, I originally had him with bat Pokemon because I thought he was a vampire, but he's not. So I gave him Ariados because, well, evocative of a vampire, sure, with the stingers and the little fangs, but not quite a vampire because he doesn't drink, he does drink blood, sure. Ariados, if they are a spider or an arachnid, will drink the, juice of their enemy when they, turn them into a juice bucket inside the webs. But I think it fits because it's not quite blood, but it is kind of blood related. Sorry, trigger warning for bloods, I guess. Oh, that's it. I thought I had more for Wild Arms 4. Anyway, moving on to Wild Arms 5. So, Wild Arms 5, I guess let's just go to Dean first. I can probably explain it best with Dean. So, Wild Arms 5 has, again, no tools, only bullets that are differently flavored, if you will. But I didn't want to go with that for Dean because he is the only character you control throughout the game. And yes, his guns are the ones that fire the bullets, but no, I don't think that's enough for me. So I decided to go off of their alternate costumes for their characters because they all have a reference to another Wild Arms character as part of their costumes as a part of the game, because Wild Arms 5 is the anniversary game for the Wild Arms series and references the previous 4 games and brings in all of the characters, main protagonists, if you will, in that game as far as the characters go. So the other thing I should say before I go into the characters is that this game has also 6 mediums or 6 essentially runes that are used to summon these ancient deities, like Gallows uses, Cecilia uses. Granted, everybody else can summon in Wild Arms 1 and 2, basically, and 3. But, you're summoning, except for 4, only Yuli can summon. But you're summoning these, kind of elemental forces, if you will. So I wanted to give each of them an assigned rune. And 3 of the characters, specifically Greg, Carol, and Chuck, have the sword, luck, and moon when they first join them. So I associate those as their official medium. So which means mountain, sea, and sky. I just gave to Dean, Rebecca, and Avril. And I went even one step further. I gave Avril Sea because she's always been my healer. I gave Rebecca Sky because she's always been the mage, which leads Mountain to Dean by default. So with all that said, hopefully now when I start saying things like mountain mediums or mountain runes and the character costumes, we can kind of all be on the same page with this. I should have probably put that on the top, but because it's only 4 Wild Arms 5, I figured it was the best to do it here. So easy, right off the bat, Center Scorch is reference to the scarf. It's got the same little circles as the half circles that Dean has. It's used by Kabu, I think, in a comic, and maybe not the anime or official material, like a fan comic as a scarf. I figured that was a nice reference to that aspect. So then the other thing to go over is Clink, the gear Pokemon, in whole Dean Stark's kind of like arc is he finds a Golem gear, and that's like from Asgard, if you will, which is not referenced here at all, but is from that, and he holds on to it, and it's like his connection to a Golem, and he wants to be a Golem hunter and stuff like that. So I think Clink being the only gear other Pokemon that I can use other than Clang, which is the evolution, sure, but I went with the base form because just a bolt, essentially. And then for the mountain Pokemon, I went with Garganacl and Gigalith, just because they're both mountainous looking Pokemon. Garganacl also has a tie-in to Asgard, the robot mecha thing we'll get, kind of not as a Pokemon, but just Asgard's in this game as well. And then for the character costumes, Dean has Jet and Tim, which I've represented with Scorbunny and Herdier, respectively. Jet because he has Cinderace, and I figured Dean would have Scorbunny because I think jumping is a thing you can do in this game. I think. Maybe not. And then Herdier I gave from Tim because I think Dean would have an evolved form, which is Herdier to Tim's Lillipup, which I think would fit for Dean, being from like a small town and stuff like that. So moving into Rebecca. Rebecca's whole shtick is she wants to be a performer, so I gave her Pokemon that are based on that. 2 of which are both performers in a way, and also based on her medium of the Sky medium. So I gave her the one that summons Solus and Misu. It's a mage Sky guy. It's not really magical per se, but it does summon rainbows, which is why I gave him Chatot. The electric form of, I'm going to butcher it, Oricorio, sure, Meowscarada, and then Meloetta, all performers in their own rights. We have the Mimicry Pokemon in Chatot. Those also got ahead like a music note. We got the performer Pokemon or the cheerleader Pokemon in the electric version of Oricorio. We have Meowscarada, who does the flower trick ability or move and also has a floating flower and is a bit of a masquerade performer, if you will. And then Meloetta is a singer. And 2 of those are representing birds for the Sky medium. So, yeah. And then for her costumes, she gets Cannon and Yuli. So I gave Horsey and Squirtle respectively. I know they're backwards the way I'm saying it, but Horsey is to reference Cannon's Kingdra, which I know is her Raypoint Pokemon, but I think it would fit her, being from a Cape Bronco, essentially a town on the sea cape, if you will. And then Squirtle from Yuli for Sturdark or Stoldark, however you want to say the summon for the water guy. And I gave him mostly pre-evolution forms because it's just a cameo of it. I don't want to give him like the straight copy of it, like the Blastoise again. But I want it to be like reference to the later evolution that would be eventually become the Pokemon that's used by the main character. So for Avril, her whole thing is she's from space and she comes down in a big old crash with an arm from the Golem Asgard. So for Avril, I gave her Behem specifically for the fact that she is from outer space and an alien. She comes crash landing. I gave her Minior for that, and I gave her the green one to represent her green outfit here. Solrock, I could have given her a Lunatone to be more representative of space, but because there's the moon medium coming up later, I decided to give her Solrock specifically for that. It's not the same thing because I know the sea is also influenced by the tide, but I figured sun also, it's a celestial body. It's close enough. I think that would work. For the sea Pokemon, she only gets one really, and that's Lapras. I think that's more the most evocative one for the sea that I could get. It's the transport Pokemon, but it crosses large bodies of water. And the sea Pokemon, or the sea summon, while not Sturdark, essentially is Sturdark in essence. So I figured that would be fitting. For her 2 costumes, she's got Anastasia from Wild Arms 2 and Cecilia from Wild Arms 1. So I gave her the base form of Zacian, Sans, Armor, and Sword. So for Anastasia having, the other Zacian with the sword. And for Cecilia, she's got Hatena, the pre-evolution of Hatterene. Again, pre-evolution just because I can. And I think that works. I think her team might be a little bit strange, but I think it'll work. And then for Greg Russellberg, again, recurring red underline for the name who wants to have a U instead of an E. He has the sword medium. And again, I've pretty much used up at this point all of the Pokemon that you would classically say are swords or have swords. So I decided to go with axes. And I think he would be similar enough. So for his character one, I guess, he's got the cowboy hat with a little cuts in it. I figured Cacturne with the little notches in that hat would be representative of it. And Greg is also a golem hunter, so he does traverse the wastelands in search of golems, and Cacturne will stalk their prey at night relentlessly, and during the day when they're tired, will sneak up on them. And I think that's kind of evocative of what Greg does with golems, if you will. For his sword medium, I gave him Garchomp, Megaform, and Cleavor specifically. And then I gave him Clawitzer because while it's not a gun, Greg does have a giant gun that he uses, and his arm in Clawitzer is not a gun, but I thought it was fitting, so I went with it. Again, I probably could have picked a better one, but no, we're here now. For his 2 costumes, he gets Gallows from Wild Arms 3 and Jack from Wild Arms 1. So I gave him Tortuga and Ferroseed respectively. Tortuga for Gallows and Ferroseed for Jack. The pre-evolutions, and I think it'll fit specifically mainly because he is, on the wasteland, he'll probably run into some of these creatures and maybe either get adopted by or pick them up as Pokemon, just kind of as a wanderer, if you will, as a drifter as they go. The next one we have is Chuck Preston, my least favorite character in Wild Arms 5, so he gets kind of a mishmash team. He has the Guardian Moon on him, so I gave him Clefable, evolves with a Moonstone, Lunatone, the most representative of Moon you can get as a Pokemon, and I gave him Dustox to represent the Luna Moth, or the Lunar Moth, if you will. Not necessarily a one-to-one tie-in, but I think that would fit. And this is pretty much all Guardian-based, because I don't care about him, except for, we'll get into one of them. But for the Moon Guardian Celesdew, I believe, in the summon, she has a long dress on that hangs off basically from the moon, and she summons butterflies, which is what Dustox is. Not a butterfly. I know it's a moth, but I didn't want to go with Beautifly because I don't think it fits the whole Luna Moth theme that I was trying to go for. But because of the long dress and the fact that if you really stretch, melodic in a way, you can make it into a crescent moon shape, I think that was a nice reference to the actual summoned entity that is being summoned by that Moon Guardian, Moon Rune. And then for his 2 costumes, he's got Magdalene from Wild Arms 1 and Arnaud from Wild Arms 3. Sorry, Wild Arms 4, excuse me. So I gave him Staravia to represent Arnaud, who has Staraptor, and I gave him Indeedee, the maid form, because he is in a 3-way love triangle with a maid who's also in love with Fairy Dude, which we'll get into soon. But I gave him the maid reference to complement what's-his-face's Magdalene's butler reference. So, yeah, least favorite character. Let's move on to my second favorite character from the game, Carol Anderson. Leave a comment in below if you think you know who my favorite character is. If you know me, it shouldn't be too hard to guess, but Carol Anderson was a fun one. She's got the luck medium, which is hard to depict because there's no Pokemon purely based on luck or chance. So I gave her the super luck ability Pokemon, Pidove and Togekiss. I don't think Togekiss may even have super luck. I may only have Serene Grace. I'm not sure. I know Togetic has it, but I think Togekiss is more evocative of her and where she's at in this way. Arbolivia, I'm going to butcher that name if I say it again, but the grass normal type from Gen 9, is reference to her missile backpack because she fires missiles from her backpack, and Arbolivia fires the little olives from her, arms, if you will. And I think that's a nice, one-to-one between the two. And then we have Spectrider, who is also a reference to the actual summoned entity itself, because the Guardian Chapapanga is a centaur in this one, and I did not realize that until like rewatching this summon animation like 4 times. They summon little rings on their hooves that make them spin, essentially the little rings around their hooves. And for that, I picked Spectrider because it has little wispies around the hooves. So I was like, that's a nice one-to-one, if you will. And for Carol's costume, she's got Virginia from Wild Arms 3 and Lilka from Wild Arms 2. So I gave her Chikorita based on Virginia's Meganium instead of a Budew, because I think Chikorita is better for her. And then Snowrunt for Lilka's Frostlass. So that's the main cast of Wild Arms 6. Let's get into some baddies. So the Varuni are essentially, to summarize the Varuni spoiler plot, if you will, Varuni are humans when humans split to those on Earth and those who went to space. When Earth, or Filgaia, I guess I should say, is dying. So Filgaia, at the brink of death, they decide, let's take some of our people into space, see if we can find either a new planet or figure out what the fuck's going on so we can come back and heal the planet. But because they left and there's less people on Filgaia, Filgaia started to heal. So now we have 2 separate Earth human beings, if you will. I keep calling it Earth. Anyway. So the ones who stayed on the planet Filgaia remained the same. The ones who left to space evolved and became what's known as the Varuni. The Varuni came back to Earth, but because they spent so much time in space, and Filgaia sees them as a foreign entity, as aliens essentially, Filgaia is trying to kill them. So that's the whole split. Varuni are humans that essentially evolved in space. But when they came back to Earth, because they were viewed as a foreign body, Filgaia started trying to kill them and cleanse them from the planet as an invasive species. So there is a cradle that is run by the Varuni, who hold all the Varuni who are too weak, frail, fragile, whatever, who are basically at the brink of death in stasis until Filgaia is fixed and can be rejuvenated to the point where they can live. So all the explanation is explaining one of the Pokemon specifically. Guzzlord is an Ultra Beast. Celestia, also an Ultra Beast. I gave every Varuni that I can, that is a main Varuni player, an Ultra Beast, because they are essentially pseudo Pokemon, alien Pokemon, not quite Pokemon, however you want to describe it. But Guzzlord in specific is because Volsung, the main baddie, decides to drain the cradle of every Varuni life in there to serve his own plan. And Guzzlord consumes everything, just like Volsung consumed all of those human lives for his own agenda. So Celestia is easier to explain. She is, I keep saying she, it looks like a female to me. I'm saying in terms of a design, long hair, flowing robes, Celestia, me, is a female presenting Pokemon, if you will. Please don't cancel me. But Celestia looks like a robot. Volsung also operates the robot in opposition to our Asgard. And I figured Celestia would be that to him, like in that sense of being the robot of Volsung. For Faridun and Elvis, we have Naganadel and Stakataka. Naganadel, coloring makes sense. He's a purple character. He's got a big old weird sword. There's a big old weird stinger. And it's an Ultra Beast. Pretty simple. Stakataka may be surprising to some for Elvis. I could have given him Buzzwole, but in my opinion, since he is more physically imposing and tall, I wanted to give him a more physically imposing and tall Pokemon. For the professor, Elvis, the professor, is also smart, and Stakataka being a hive mind, I think fits more so with that vibe. Because the next two, for Stephanie and Kartikaya, I don't think Stakataka would fit for Kartikaya, so I gave him Buzzwole, only because Kartikaya is the boss that will, end speed runs, will be an RNG nightmare, is hard as hell. He is a tough boy. And I think the coloring makes more sense for Kartikaya than it does for Elvis, specifically with the orange-red theming. And then Persephone, she is the female love interest, if you will, to Volsung. She is represented by Pheromosa here, only for the sense that she is, Persephone and Pheromosa share similar intro names, intro characters, Persephone and, Pheromosa, peas and stuff like that. But I think it's evocative of her as a character in terms of not damsel in distress, bombshell, like she's a bombshell vixen. The film noir is failing me right now. It's the noir trope of the like, oh, my husband's dead, I'm the killer. Black Widow. I mean, it's the Black Widow essentially, but it's not the phrase I'm looking for. Anyway, it's that relationship to me that I have for Persephone and Pheromosa. Like, she will kill her husband and take the inheritance money and leave, or the money and leave. Rounding out Wild Arms 5, we have one of my least favorite characters, Nightburn Ackland, the human who sells out other humans because he wants to work for the Varuni. There's more to that for sure, but, he's kind of an asshole. But I gave him gumshoes because they're both making a similar expression, both that kind of grimaced face, eyes, eyebrows down, stuff like that. But I think if he had one Pokemon, he would be Pyroar. I think, because I get, what's the word I'm looking for? Lysander vibes from this guy. I get mad Lysander vibes from this guy from Pokemon Generation 6, the Team Flare. I get vibes from that, where he's like, I'll sacrifice my planet for the sake of this ideal. I'll sacrifice humans for the Varuni, stuff like that. So, the final game we're going to be going over, as we're nearing the 2-hour mark here, is Wild Arms Crossfire. So, starting off with Clarissa Arwen, I think this is going to be another thing I have to explain. None of these characters really have that much depth in terms of their characterization, not like previous Wild Arms games, but there's a job class system, and so I decided to pick 2 random jobs for each of the 6 main protagonists and slap them on them. So we'll go through their character associations first, and then I'll go through the jobs, similar to how we did with Wild Arms 5, where I went through the character associations first, and then the costume characters associations next. So for Clarissa, she is famously known as the dandelion armor, so I gave her Skiploom. She's also famously known for wearing a lot of blue, so I gave her Meryl. Easy ones out of the way. Alolan Golem is because she has a gun, and it shoots a beam of light, and there's no Pokemon that use Hyper Beam. I mean, there are, but I didn't want to give them just a random Hyper Beam user, so I decided to go with Alolan Golem, for the sole fact that he fires a giant rock from his electromagnetic poles, if you will. And then Mimikyu is simple because Clarissa is impersonating the princess, because they are, spoiler alert, twins. And Mimikyu because she's not quite the princess, but she's kind of the princess. It's a fun reference in that kind of juxtaposition. I think they're twins. Also, correct me if I'm wrong. I think they're twins. I might be wrong. And then for her jobs, I decided to assign Clarissa the Fantastica and Gadgeteer job, which I represented with Bronzong and Greedent, respectively. So for Bronzong, the Fantastica's weapon is a bell, and I figured that would fit for Bronzong. And for the Gadgeteer, it uses and enhances items, and the only item Pokemon I could think of, because the items in Wild Arms are berries, would be Greedent, because it is a big ol' squirrel full of treats in its tail. Phileas Arwen, Clarissa's adoptive brother who has amnesia, is from space, so I decided to go for that. And also uses lances in his primary job, so I gave him kind of lance-like Pokemon with Cloyster and Hisuian. If I can get the name out, Samurott, I can get the name out. For the amnesia aspect, I gave him Slowpoke because, while not necessarily an amnesiac itself, Slowpoke is a very slow, methodical, will often forget what it's doing, will forget that it's getting its tail eaten Pokemon. And to reference the alien aspect, similarly to Avril, I decided to give him LGM, the little green man guy. He's also a pilot, as we find out in the game, so for one of his job classes, I kind of wanted to reference that as well. So for Phileas' 2 jobs, I gave him Sentinel and Strider. Sentinel, I gave him Armorage, because it's a big old armor guy. And for Strider, it's the archer guy, but they have a lot of movement abilities like jump and stuff. So I gave him Bombardier. Also, you're dropping rocks, you're firing arrows. It's a similar theme, but also because he is a pilot and a kind of a pilot. That's the right word. I gave him a flying type. So the next character, one of my personal favorites on this list, is Labyrinthia Wordsworth. She is the mage, and she's also the tutor that was tutoring Princess Alexia, which we'll get to in a second. So, one of these things is not like the other, and one of these things is based on their costume. So I gave her Venomoth purely for the fact that she's in a purple robe and a maroon like dress. Purple wings, purple S, stuff like that. I think Venomoth can also learn like Psybeam and maybe Psychic to that extent. So I gave, that kind of similarity that way. Gothitelle, purely reference to the dress, purely reference to the fact that she is a mage, and psychic types, fairy types are what I associate with magic. For her big boy, Metagross up there, she is known for being like I'm a capable woman despite my age and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, I gave her a Metagross to represent, it's a fully evolved Pokemon, but it's also the same intelligence as a supercomputer. And Labyrinthia is essentially the squad's tactician, mage. She's the brains of the operation, if you will. She's the brains behind the group's name, Chevalier Blanc, and like the kind of history, teaching Clarissa how to be a princess, essentially how to fake it till she makes it. And for the teacher aspect, it's a big stretch. If you've ever played Pokemon Stadium, there's a Simon Says game where Clefairy is the teacher and dressed up as a teacher. That's why I gave her Clefairy. No other reason. For her 2 jobs, I gave her Sacred Slayer, represented by Chandelure, and an Emulator, represented by Porygon 2. I didn't want to give her Porygon Z because I didn't think that fit her as a character, but I think Porygon 2 being an evolved version of that would also fit the Emulator job and also fit her as a character. And Chandelure is the same thing. I think Chandelure would fit her as a character, being from the palace and from, like, not royalty, but being a teacher, if you will. And Sacred Slayers are healers and exorcising the dead, and I think having a ghost type do that would fit. Also, I think there's similar colors between the Sacred Slayer job, if you're not a main character who can actually change outfits, and Chandelure makes sense in my book. Moving on to the next character we'll get chronologically in this game is Levin Brenton. He is the son of the Knights of Elysius. So I gave him, he's also a mixed martial artist, martial master, I believe is called his job. So I gave him a lot of fighting types, mostly fighting types. Mineshao, Sock, Chestnut, and even Tyrogue are all there. Tyrogue more so because he's, I think, the youngest besides the dog to join us. He's probably, I think, a year younger than Clarissa, maybe. But just to give him the untapped potential of whatever he wants to be into. Is he wanting a kicking master, a punching master, a mix of both, I think that fits him. Mineshao is more for the clothes. He's got like oversized sleeves. Mineshao has oversized sleeves. Sock is just because he is the martial master, I believe that's what the job title is, and he's got the, the karate gi on, and I think that fits in terms of what Brenton or Levin is going to be doing. And Levin is known for running in, not thinking, and I think being a knight or being from knights, Chestnut makes sense. For the 2 jobs I gave Levin, I gave him the excavator job and the extremist job. The excavators find items by digging on the ground, so I gave him Digger's Bee. They use a slingshot, no slingshot Pokemon unfortunately, so I gave him, the next best thing. The mole rabbit who digs with his ears. It's a horrid looking Pokemon, and I don't know why it was made. But I gave him Dodrio as like some comeuppance because the extremists are known for being extremely fast. That's kind of the whole shtick as the role. Is they're fast and they hit hard. Dodrio kind of looks like that. So, looks fast and looks like it's going to hit hard. My favorite character, Ragnar Blitz the Bred. I wish you would tell me why he's my favorite character, chat. Or, I keep calling you guys chat. Any comments down below? He's a harder one to give Pokemon to, but I decided because he's a mercenary, because he is haunted by the past, because he is also the cook and the chef of the group, I gave him Pokemon around that. So Marowak, he uses a boomerang, similar to why I gave Jet. The regular Marowak, I gave Ragnar here a Alolan Marowak because it's a ghost type, haunted by his past, but it's also still got that bone meringue accent, if you will, and he's a boomerang user. Haunter, pure haunted by his past. One of the things that he is upset by is when the dead come back to life as zombies via the arms that they have their jobs through, which is kind of why I went with Haunter, because he has no arms, and arms are kind of the reason why they're coming back from the dead. Flapple, purely because the coloring matches the red and green, and also he is the chef. I wanted some food-like Pokemon there. The same thing for Breloom. He is a physically imposing man, and I think Breloom, when he punches, is a physically imposing Pokemon for a mushroom Pokemon. So I figured that would work. For Ragnar's jobs, I gave him Machamp and Berserker. Machamp is for the grappler job, basically wrestling, if you will. And then Berserker because of Berserker. He's a Berserker class. He's a Berserker Pokemon. I can't differentiate it with my allergies, but please note I'm saying one versus the other. When I say Berserker or Berserker, they are two different words in my mind. But it may sound similar when I'm nasal up like this. So, Princess does not have good art, so I went with Million Memories. But Princess Alexia is going to get a lot of princess-like Pokemon. So I gave her Gallade because she has a big ol' sword, not featured in the art, that she uses. I gave her Tinkaton for the coloring, but also because it's got a big-ass hammer. I figured that would fit thematically. I gave her Mega Diancie because of the coloring of the princess outfit, and also the fact that it's a skirt, and like, you know, it looks similar to the headpiece, to the skirt, to like the pauldrons, to like the dress. I think it fits. And then I gave her Coferigus, which is the one thing that doesn't fit with the rest of them, because she was presumed dead the entire time and was almost assassinated by one of the characters we'll get into. And so I gave her Coferigus because she's basically kept in a cage or in a cell for the entirety of the game, and she comes out and is alive. And Coferigus, while a ghost type, I think mimics that, being trapped inside like a place you can't get out of. For the 2 and final jobs, I gave Alexia, because there's more jobs than I've listed here. I gave her Geomancer and Enigmancer specifically. Geomancer is one that attunes to the elements of the world that are in the ray points, and I gave Kecleon because Kecleon can transform into nothing. Invisibility also can transform the typing based on the environment, if you will. Maybe not exactly the environment, but that's the headcanon I'm going with. And then the Enigmancer is like a shielding role. It uses walls and shields, buffs, and somewhat debuffs. I figured Claydol would do that from Protect and Reflect and stuff like that. From Claydol would make sense thematically. And then for the best boy, the pupper, who is the pupper himself, Tony, I gave him Furfrou. 1, I was running out of dog Pokemon, and 2, I know it's not a poodle, but it's close enough. It's a white dog, you know, in my opinion. And you can accessorize Tony with a scarf. You can accessorize Furfrou with a fur. It's a weak setting. It's a weak line, but it's the best I have so far. Rupert Dandridge, Clarissa's personal villain, if you will. I gave Crocodile because they're both drifters in the desert wastelands. I figured having a ground dark type would make sense for him. He also has a gun. He also has a sword, I believe. The Iskender Bay is the sword. And, you know, while not an exact sword, Crocodile does have that long nose that is reminiscent of a sword in that sense. Charlton Blunt, I don't know who he's associated with specifically. If anything, I would say Ragnar, maybe. He's got wheezing. He smokes. He is also not... I think he is also a part of the Undead. It's been a while since I played Crossfire, and I don't remember the plot all that well, despite streaming the entire thing. So I think I could have given him a ghost type as well, but I just really want to stick with, like, one thing I could pick for the villain specifically. So he smokes, and he's got, like, you know, that aspect going for him. That's all I really went with for him. Weisheit is Felius's personal villain. I know that one for a fact because Weisheit wants to consume and control Felius's body because only the ship will respond to Felius, and Weisheit has been stuck here for generations since they've crash landed. He was ripped through time travel shenanigans and stuff. So Weisheit in this form is body hopping. So he's got Deoxys because they both come from space, and Deoxys can change his forms just like Weisheit can control or can change his bodies essentially. Moving on to one of the few final characters we have left, we have Edna. So we have Jinx and Bruxish. Jinx for the dress, Bruxish for the bad makeup. Jinx also for the dress, if you will. I like the purple coloring with her hair. I like the red coloring for Jinx with her dress. I like the gold accents for, you know, the accents of yellow on her. I think these are a layup for this Edna Warren character. She's a mage. She's a psychic type. They're both psychic types, you know. Bruxish is also from Burning Calcuna BK because he suggested if there's any character who has ugly makeup, might as well make it for them, if you will. And then the final character, the boss of all bosses, the boss that I hate with every single cell of my being, Katrina Leanne Alexia's sister. Katrina cannot feel fear. She cannot feel any emotion like that. She is not going to make a good leader. So I gave her a Galarian Corsola because it's a ghost type. And it looks like it's sad. But does it feel anything? No, because it's a ghost type. Maybe heartless of me to say, but she is a bitch and she deserves to die. The reason I gave her Hydreigon is because her end boss form looks like Hydreigon if you put like her face on the middle face. Like she is a nightmare to fight. Hydreigon, a nightmare to fight. Big Dragon Boys, not a big fan of either of them. Not a big fan of Katrina. Character-wise, I think she's great. She's been used as a doll her entire life. I probably could have given her Banette for that exact reason, but I liked the Eat My Dust Banette reason for Lilka anyway. So that is the final character of this exercise. It is just at the 2-hour mark, so please forgive me if my voice is dying. It feels like it's dying. I'm going to be streaming later tonight, so this will go up Sunday, so hopefully my voice will be better by Sunday. But before we end things, I just want to say thank you guys so much for hanging out with me for 2 hours while I went through the entirety of the Wild Arms games, sans a couple of characters, and gave everybody a Pokemon. I really appreciate it, friends. It makes me feel, special that you guys wanted to sit here and listen to me talk for 2 hours. Some new things to announce, though, as we go into the final slide here. You can find me on twitch.tv/ShiradaSky. I stream 7 nights a week, Monday through Sunday, a different game each night. They're usually themed. Usually, for example, Wednesdays are my way back days where I go back through past games that I've played in my past or childhood games that I've played growing up. Thursdays are like horror games since I want to get scared sometime during the week, and I figured Thursday is not Friday. It's the most terrifying day of the week, besides Monday, of course. You can find me on twitter.com/ShiradaSky. Not safe for work in any of these places, just FYI. I myself as a whole, not safe for any work consumption, if you will. Just wonder why I have a job. But you can find me on Twitter. I actually did change my handle. It used to be Sky Shirada, but to make it everything uniform, I changed it to Shirada Sky. I got the username. I've had it. Never did anything with it. And I'm like, well, I'm going to switch it. Still switcheroo. Now I'm Shirada Sky, hopefully everywhere. And introducing a brand new thing, which I have not done before, and we'll see how it goes. I don't do video games stuff like this often on this channel. I'm much more of a gay, erotic, gay, romance book reviewer. This is going on here because my other channel that I have is for Twitch VODs, and I don't think anybody wants to watch through this there, even though this is basically the length of a VOD on Twitch, if you will. So I figured might as well make a Patreon for my book review / occasional video game content, maybe / always going to be loving to talk about Wild Arms content on this Shirada Sky book review channel, if you will. So if you guys feel like it, I know you can do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. Honestly, just getting this out to more people is the only thing I would ever ask of you. I don't ask you to support me on Patreon. I don't expect you guys to give me your hard-earned money. I have a full-time job right now. I'm thankfully blessed with money that I have coming from that. This is a hobby for me through and through. I can't promise you more Wild Arms content in this vein. This is idea that I kind of stole from regular Pat, if you will, on YouTube when he did it for Kingdom Hearts. I didn't steal all the teams, obviously, but I just stole the idea and kind of some of the rules that I made it my own. But I do this as a passion hobby of mine. It's my expensive hobby, if you will. Making these videos, streaming, playing video games, reviewing, gay romance novels, stuff like that. So there are some perks on Patreon if you want to go feel and check it out. Again, no pressure. I appreciate you guys just simply watching these videos and spreading the word out. That's all I really care about. If you want to help me with the algorithms by liking, commenting, subscribing, doing all that stuff, I would appreciate it. There's no pressure from me on anything. I really love having you guys here on my Twitch journey and this journey that I'm starting. That's all I can ask for. You guys have been the best of friends during the pandemic when I couldn't go through and talk to anybody. That's why I started streaming. And now that I'm kind of getting into this content creation space, if you will, I really appreciate you guys sticking with me and, helping me out along the way. I couldn't be where I am without you guys. So that's it for today. I thank you guys so much for hanging out with me for about 2 hours, 5 minutes or so. I will see you guys when I can see you, either on Twitch, on Twitter, however I can see you. I love you all so much. Thank you again so much for sitting with me and letting me talk about potential Pokemon teams for Wild Arms characters. So I'll see you guys soon. Have a good one, my friends. and stay safe out there.